On April 24, 2026, a highly detailed report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies leaked a terrifying reality. The American empire has an expiration date, and it is exactly 39 days. While the financial media was busy cheerleading the end of Operation Epic Fury in Iran, the Pentagon was in a full-blown behind-closed-doors panic. In just 7 weeks of combat, the U.S. military burned through over 50% of its THAAD interceptors, precision strike missiles, and Patriot defenses to replace them. It will take 3 to 5 years, but here's the ultimate blind spot that Wall Street is terrified to price in. We might not be able to replace them at all. The Raytheon missiles defending our aircraft carriers, the F-35 targeting arrays, the armor-piercing ammunition, they don't run on American steel. They run on gallium, germanium, and antimony. And guess who refines 99% of the world's gallium and dictates the antimony market? Beijing. Back in December 2024, China quietly initiated an outright ban on antimony exports to U.S. military end users. The market panicked, sending prices surging roughly 400% to nearly $60,000 a metric ton by mid-2025. The standard boomer macro fantasy is that if anyone threatens the U.S. dollar, Washington just parks a carrier strike group off their coast. But what happens when that carrier runs out of precision-guided munitions in 3 weeks, and Beijing simply turns off the mineral tap to build more? You are being lied to about American hard power. The U.S. military has been castrated by its own supply chain, and your investment portfolio is currently priced for a geopolitical dominance that mathematically no longer exists. Look at the data they are hiding from you. Boomers still think we live in 1991. They believe an aircraft carrier is the ultimate projection of power, an unsinkable fortress of democracy that bends the global bond market to its will. Let me tell you a secret. An aircraft carrier isn't power. It is a multi-billion-dollar floating target practice if the interceptor missiles defending it run out in 3 weeks. And they just did. Operation Epic Fury wasn't a victory. It was a devastating audit of the American military-industrial complex. We fired thousands of multi-million-dollar interceptors to swat down mass-produced drones that cost less than a used Honda Civic. The exchange rate on violence has fundamentally broken against us. We are bleeding out financially to maintain a tactical illusion. I used to tell my clients, never bet against the U.S. military-industrial complex. I genuinely believed we could out-manufacture anyone on Earth. It was the bedrock of American exceptionalism. But then I looked at the Department of Defense's procurement backlog and my blood ran cold. The problem is not money. Congress can print $1 trillion tomorrow morning. The Treasury can issue bonds until the ink runs dry, but you cannot print raw material. You cannot authorize a piece of legislation that magically materializes the chemical elements required to make a missile fly straight. We are treating a physical crisis as if it were a monetary problem. Let us dissect the anatomy of a modern weapon, down to its very cellular structure. We throw around the term critical minerals like they are just another line item on a spreadsheet. They are not. They are the physical bottleneck of modern warfare. Take gallium. This isn't just some obscure metal. In the form of gallium nitride and gallium arsenide, it is the absolute foundation of high-frequency radar and electronic warfare. Silicon melts or fails under the extreme heat and voltage required for military-grade signal. Without gallium, the active electronically scanned array, the AC radar that allows the F-35 fighter jet to see its enemy before being seen, is functionally blind. The ASA radar doesn't just scan the sky. It jams enemy communications, acts as a targeting designator, and processes thousands of signals per second. It requires power densities that would literally incinerate standard silicon. That is why we use gallium. But here is the kicker. We designed the world's most advanced fighter jet, but we have to ask our greatest geopolitical adversary for the materials to build its eyes. How is that for national security? Do you know how much gallium the United States consumes for its entire defense apparatus in a single year? About 20 tons? You could fit the entire annual supply of American national security on the back of one flatbed truck. But without that single truckload, the entire machine stops. The production lines at Lockheed and Raytheon freeze. Then there is antimony. Most people cannot even find it on the periodic table, yet it is the core hardening agent for armor-piercing ammunition, the essential compound for infrared night vision goggles, and the primary flame retardant that keeps the miles of wiring inside a nuclear submarine from spontaneously combusting. Do you know how many active antimony mines exist in the United States today? 0. We haven't had a functional producing antimony mine since the early 2000s. We rely entirely on foreign supply, and the global refining capacity is utterly dominated by China. They control 74% of the processing capacity. Am I exaggerating the impact of a few obscure metals, you might think? We can just substitute them. Or we can just open a mine in Idaho or Nevada. I thought that too. Until I saw the reality of the 10-year permitting nightmares under the EPA, the localized environmental lawsuits, and the staggering capital expenditures required just to break ground. You don't just dig up antimony. The processing of stibnite ore into military-grade antimony requires highly toxic smelting processes that Western environmental regulations have effectively outlawed on our own soil. We offshored the pollution, and in doing so, we offshored our sovereignty. And here's the brutal truth of chemistry. Substituting antimony in ammunition hardening is physically impossible at scale. You cannot swap out atomic structures because you are geopolitically inconvenienced. This brings us to the villain of this story, and I need you to understand that the true adversary here is not just a foreign nation. It is a meticulously engineered system of leverage. Beijing did not wake up yesterday and decide to cut us off. This is a masterstroke of Sun Tzu-level economic warfare, executed in plain sight over decades. They didn't need to build a larger navy to defeat our fleet. They just bought up the global choke points of the materials required to build our fleet. Why fight a kinetic war when you can simply suffocate your enemy's supply chain? Let's retrace their steps, because the timeline is chilling. In 2023, China imposed export controls on the refining technologies and physical exports of gallium and germanium. Washington brushed it off, claiming we could just recycle materials. Then came August 2024. China introduced a dual-use licensing regime for antimony, meaning every single gram exported had to be approved by the Chinese state. Wall Street yawned, assuming it was just diplomatic posturing. But in December 2024, they dropped the hammer, an outright ban on antimony exports to any United States military end user. The price of antimony didn't just rise, it violently exploded. It jumped from around $15,000 to nearly $60,000 a metric ton in a matter of months. It created a two-tier global market. Facilities outside of China, like the massive processing plant in Oman, went bankrupt. Why? Because Beijing purposefully starved them of the raw concentrate feedstock needed to run their roasters. China sacrificed a negligible amount of export revenue to completely decapitate Western refining alternative. By late 2025, Beijing quietly paused some of these hard bans. Financial pundits celebrated. They said the trade war is cooling and supply chains are healing. What profound ignorance. They didn't retreat. They were putting a leash on a dog to show it who holds the collar. They established the mechanism. They proved they can shut down the American defense supply chain with the stroke of a pen. They are holding the Damocles sword over our heads, knowing they can flip the switch off anytime they want. Stop blaming the current administration or the last administration for being weak on foreign policy. They aren't weak by choice. They are mathematically paralyzed. They are paralyzed by a supply chain that we enthusiastically sold to China in the 1990s in exchange for cheaper consumer electronics and higher corporate profit margins. We traded the forge of our empire for cheap flat-screen televisions and inflated stock buybacks. And now the bill is due. This military castration connects directly to the absolute core of the global financial system, the US dollar. The hegemony of the dollar is not backed by gold. It is not backed by the sheer goodwill of the international community, and it certainly isn't backed by our fiscal responsibility. It is backed by the petrodollar framework, the threat of economic sanctions, and ultimately, the unchallengeable violence of the U.S. military. The dollar is strong because if you threaten the system, a carrier strike group shows up off your coast. That is the underlying collateral of the global debt market. But what if the world knows the carrier is firing blanks? Look at the defense sector. The defense primes are valued on the assumption of infinite government contracts. But a contract is just a piece of paper. If a defense contractor cannot secure the supply chain for the physical materials, they cannot deliver the product. Revenue recognition halts. Earnings miss, but it goes deeper. If the U.S. attempts to project power to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, or if we try to militarily intimidate the BRICS nations as they build their alternative financial architecture, Beijing simply turns off the mineral tap. War games conducted over the last 2 years consistently show that in a high-intensity conflict in the Pacific, the United States runs out of precision-guided munitions in less than a week. Not a month, a week. And once those magazines are empty, replacing them requires the exact metals that the enemy controls. If the U.S. cannot protect global shipping lanes because we are rationing missiles, the cost of maritime insurance skyrockets. Supply chains fracture. Inflation violently re-accelerates. The Federal Reserve is forced to hike rates into an economic slowdown, blowing out the interest expense on $35 trillion of sovereign debt. The lack of an obscure metal like antimony can literally trigger a sovereign debt crisis. Our own treasury bonds prevent us from launching an all-out financial war, because a forced decoupling would instantly trigger a massive sell-off, and China's absolute monopoly on critical minerals prevents us from launching a physical war. We are locked in a geopolitical checkmate, pretending we are still playing chess. I want to be wrong about this. I desperately hope there is some secret DARPA stockpile sitting deep in a mountain bunker somewhere in Colorado. I really do. But when the Pentagon officially and quietly has to warn key allies like the United Kingdom and Japan that their scheduled missile deliveries are delayed indefinitely because we are simply out of stock, you realize the bluff has been called. The emperor has no interceptors. This is the macro catalyst that no one is talking about. The transition from a paper-backed economy to a hard asset economy isn't just about people buying gold bars to hedge against inflation or tech bros hoarding Bitcoin. It is a fundamental, violent realignment of global power. It is about who holds the physical elements, the actual dirt, the metals, the refining capacity that allow empires to enforce their will. For 50 years, we financialized our economy. We convinced ourselves that writing the code and engineering the financial derivatives was superior to pouring the steel and refining the ore. We traded our manufacturing base for paper wealth. We celebrated stock buybacks while China built the world's most robust and weaponized metallurgical infrastructure. Now, the paper is losing value, and the physical base of reality belongs to our greatest rival. Your 401k, your equities, your entire investment portfolio is betting on an American century that currently has a 39-day supply of ammunition left. The illusion of American hard power is over. The transition from dominance to dependence is complete. The only question is, how long until the bond market realizes the U.S. Navy is firing blanks? Think about it.